Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
You gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got it.
Chris
Already
Dowhouse,
hearing about these are pointless in fantasy in this sense.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
And I'll crush you like a paper cup.
So this is where we get into our favorite starts and our not so favorite sits into this one. So Adam, let's start with you on the bust side because you're gonna piss me off with this one, buddy. But go ahead.
Yeah, for me, it's Chris Olave. It's just the matchup. This offensive line is tough. Losing their center has been awful for them, and that matchup with Chris Jones is a little scary. Derek Carr is under 50% completion percentage under pressure. His overall rating is actually fairly good, but it's because early on in the season he was just lighting the world on fire, right? The last couple weeks, less so. Now, last week he played really well, but the box stats weren't necessarily insane. Point being, Chris Jones versus his backup center is just not a matchup that I'm excited for. I think the ADOT from him is going to be really low, and I think that this passing offense might struggle to get going. This might be a stinker of a game while both teams are kind of trying to figure out, due to injuries, how to change their offenses from what they thought they had at the beginning of the season to their new reality now that they've had some very difficult injuries to deal with. Saints are a little bit further along in that process, and I don't think that Olave, necessarily duds out. But again, this is just a touch matchup for a team that, by the way, the Chiefs' overall pass rush and secondary is very good as well. It's not just that matchup, but that is the scariest portion of it.
Yeah, look, I get where you're coming from. It is a tough matchup against Kansas City. We're also talking about a guy who's been 80 yards plus over the last 3 weeks. Last week, he was supposed to come into a hamstring injury. We didn't even know he was going to play. Winds up getting 10 targets, 8 receptions, 87 yards against a no-slouch secondary in the Atlanta Falcons. I think you're still probably playing Chris Olave, but yeah, you're not expecting a ceiling game, a bust-out game, or by any stretch of the mean. So I'm with you on that one.
I'll say this. I'm not necessarily auto-benching him, I think, but he's not in my top 24. I think the 16 ECR is ridiculous. I think he's a high-end flex play. So I don't think he's coming out of lineups, but.
Oh, man. We got a question coming in here from Derek real quick. Start Gibson or Justice Hill in a full-point PPR this week. Chris, what do you think?
For me, it's Gibson. I love the matchup versus the Dolphins. This Dolphins offense can't score any points. They can't do anything in general. New England's going to try to do anything you can do to score points, including use more Antonio Gibson. You throw him involved in the passing attack. I know Justice Hill's guy. We're excited about the PPR game, but you're playing Cincinnati. Look like it happened last week with the Washington team. All you had to do is hand the ball over and over again to the running backs. McNichols had 2 touchdowns. Robinson ran all over them. Why would they do anything different? With Lamar Jackson doing nothing but having to hand the ball off, basically, I don't think Justice Hill really be needed in this game. So I'm going to go with Gibson.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. So Chase, his bust, to show you guys know, was Patrick Mahomes. Going back to that Monday night game, kind of in line with Adam's theory that game in general might be a stinker. Look, he acknowledges that, yeah, you're probably not in a position to bench him necessarily, but the Saints are allowing the third fewest points to opposing quarterbacks. And Mahomes, look, I'll say this. Mahomes hasn't been a good fantasy start in like 2 years. Kind of Chris's point at this point. It hasn't really been great for a fantasy standpoint. I have Patrick Mahomes as my QB 14. So I'm kind of with Chase on this one. I don't have him as a top 12 must play either. I'm looking to bench him. And, just to get a little dig at me because of my personal hatred for Baker Mayfield, thinking he's overrated. And by the way, from an NFL standpoint, he is overrated. But I'm also with Chase on this page for this week. I do have him as QB9. So, yeah, I have him right ahead of Patrick Mahomes. I would play Baker over Patrick Mahomes this particular week as well. No doubt about it. So, Chris, who's your bust?
Yeah, this guy's not necessarily a bust to me, Dan, but this is a guy that ECR-wise I think is just a little too high. I think that people are, loving what they saw last year. That's Nico Collins. Look, Nico Collins was fantastic, and I had to eat some crow. Nico Collins being one of the best receivers for this Texas offense. Having said that, you're going against a Buffalo team that, despite getting blown out last week, has not giving up any yards to that receiver one. They shut down receiver ones for the last 2 years almost, basically. I don't know how they do it. They do it with fumes, different guys, but they play very soft zones, but they somehow, some way make sure that receiver one does not go off. You have Tank Dell could be possibly back. You have Joe Mixon possibly be back. A lot of other mouths that could be fed in this offense. Nico Collins was fantastic. I think you're still going to start him, but I think you're going to look more like seeing that four catch, 10 target game where the 81 yards previous week than last week's 190 something yard blowout and 2 touchdowns. So just saying Nico Collins is not a receiver one for me as ECR has him this week.
But you're playing him, right?
I think he's definitely a play. I just think you want to make sure that you're not depending on him to be this guy who's going to be like, this top tier receiver. You might want to look for a little upside, maybe in your flex or somewhere other position.
You're not wrong in the sense that this is not the greatest matchup in the world. I mean, the Buffalo Bills are literally third in yards per pass play given up right now. Like, you can run the ball on the Bills, passing on them, maybe not so much. And if Joe Mixon is back, although I am a little bit alarmed by the fact that he didn't practice on a Wednesday when he was supposed to be getting pretty close last week. We'll see if that actually amounts to anything or not tomorrow when I talk to Dr. Brian Scott. Nico Collins has been the best receiver in football right now. So he's in my top 5. I can't take him out of my top 5 right now. He's been playing too well against other tough matchups. He's been the number 1 target for CJ Stroud. He's in my top 5. There's no way he's not a wide receiver 1 until further notice at this point, frankly. So I would disagree with that standpoint, but do point out that is not a great matchup. So maybe he doesn't have the wide receiver 1 overall that he's been the last few weeks. Let's switch gears. Let's go to Crush. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I got to take my bust. My bad. So my bust for this week actually is Drake London. And it's kind of in a similar vein of the way Olave is Adams' bust, right? I don't have my top 24. Now, if you play in 3 receiver sets, if you play flex, he might still be in that conversation because I still have him as wide receiver 26. But ECR's got him at wide receiver 13. Not really sure why. I don't know what about this Atlanta Falcon offense has been all that impressive. Now, the opportunities have been there, right? He's got the 12th highest target share rate. He's been 3rd in first read percentage, which allows me to believe, again, kind of like the Bijan thing, that this situation will improve as the season goes on. But I'm not big on it for this particular week. He's been the wide receiver 29 in average points per game over the past 4 weeks. So he's been a wide receiver 3 as it is. He's only 38th in fantasy points per route run. He's been 60th in yards per route run, 69th in yards per target, which has been the real pathetic part of it all because he's only getting targeted pretty much 5 yards past the line of scrimmage. I exaggerate, of course, but that's what it feels like. And on top of it, he's facing a Bucs team that's allowed only the 7th least, fantasy points to wide receivers, the 7th least amount of passing yards per play, the 11th least expected points added per pass. It's not a great matchup for Drake London on top of the woes that the Atlanta Falcons offense has been seeing. So I am not big on Drake London this week, more as a wide receiver 3. With that, let's go to the guys that we actually love. Let's end this thing on a positive note. Adam, who do you love this week? Who do you have a crush on?
I got to say it. I am buying into
Courtland
Sutton this week. Not only this week, he's actually a buy candidate for me. Look, we're talking about a guy who is 7th in targets so far this season. He has not necessarily realized a ton of that, and I get that. But he's played 4 of the best defenses so far this year. Look, Seattle's defense, I think, is legitimately good despite what happened to Detroit. I'm sorry that their offense is strong. All right, when they're on, and it is what it is. Outside of that, we can even toss that game aside. Sure, fine. Seattle is, even if their defense is the worst in the league, which they're not, and we're going to get to that matchup here in a moment. Steelers, objectively, very, very good defense. I don't think there's any argument against that. Jets, objectively, very, very good secondary. I don't think there's any argument against that. They've had a tough time so far, and it's a rookie quarterback. He's played some of the best secondaries in the league, best pass rushes in the league so far. And now he's going against a secondary that is very similar to the secondaries he was playing on Saturdays. I'm sorry, this Raiders secondary is bad. First of all, minor tangent. Browns fans victory lapping Watson's performance this past week can stop it. I know that was like their silver lining, like, oh, but at least Deshaun Watson played well. This is a college defense. It is. Their pass rush is good. The run defense is good. This secondary is college level. It should be playing on Saturdays, genuinely. None of their secondary players should belong in the NFL at this point. So let's leave that. Come back to Courtland Sutton on the whole has been playing well. He's been doing his thing. He's generating targets. Bo Nix, not so much, but this is a very good pass blocking offensive line so far this season, and I think you can bank on the pass blocking offensive line, keeping him upright. They're throwing the ball a crap ton. Look, Bo Nix might not be a good passer or, the steady hand that, maybe you would hope. He's going to throw the ball, and he's going to throw the ball to Courtland Sutton. And he's going to do so unpressured a decent amount of the time. I think that combination, when you're talking about a secondary that, again, is on a Saturday level, I think you can get away with it. And their schedule on the whole gets a whole lot easier for them in that regard, moving down the season, which is why I think that this is a potentially, good opportunity to get into Courtland Sutton on the whole. I mean, you don't see many guys in the top 15 most targeted players who are, as low in fantasy points per game. I think you're going to see a positive regression there, if nothing else. I mean, that many targets, those few fantasy points really doesn't happen on a large sample size almost ever.
I got to ask you this. Would you play Courtland Sutton over Chris Olave this week?
It would genuinely be a tough task. Look, I'm sorry. I have always been a targets believer, and I have one game where I'm getting meaningful targets out of Chris Olave this season. One. And this is a tough matchup for them.
No, I would say one game. I mean, he had 6 and 8 and 10. I mean,
no, he has 10, 6, 6, 2.
Yeah, 6 is significant target share. I don't think that's that's not nothing. The 2, yes, absolutely. But look, Bo Nix, you talk about the secondaries that need to play on Saturday. Bo Nix needs to still be playing on Saturday. All right, the guy had 60 yards passing last week. I'm not gonna. That's
all people snooze.
What's that? What'd you say, Chris? Okay, I guess.
I said you gotta go ahead. That's his take. You gotta give him his take.
We can back and forth on each other's takes. That's the whole point of the show.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the whole point of the show, is that we all have our different takes. I'm not disputing it. I'm not saying it's not a good matchup for Courtland Sutton. It is, but we still have to take into factor who the hell the quarterback is, I think, to some degree. And the guy is playing 6 yards a game. As Bo Nix, I think he's had one 200-yard passing game so far this season.
No, he genuinely graded out really well the week prior.
He did. He actually had a top deep percentage passing percentage, which I don't know how that happens, but he did.
Okay.
I didn't get into that Bo Nix thing. We'll talk about that a little bit next week, because I actually had some number for Bo Nix.
Look, I'm not a Bo Nix believer, but I think everything else aligning makes it worth it.
Not going to dispute it's a good matchup. Not going to dispute that Courtland Sutton should be sniffing your flex territory. I'm with you on that one. I have to push back if you're going to be thinking about whether or not you play Sutton or Olave. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
On the whole, for the record, I am in on Sutton on the whole for the rest of the season. I think almost every week the rest of the year I would just insta-start Chris Olave over Courtland Sutton. I just want to at least make that clear.
No. I wasn't questioning. I wasn't questioning that part. It was only for this week. All right, so this is go to Chase real quick. Chase loves Brock Bowers this week. Second in targets at the tight end position, which we know has been an absolute train wreck. We've actually talked about that quite a bit this show. Just behind Adams, of course, and Jacoby Myers, and Adams is not going to be playing once again this week. Bowers, he's been a steady presence as a tight end. Last 2 weeks facing a tough Broncos defense. Yes, it wasn't great. He probably bounces back this week, though. I don't know. His message, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with this. His message is all over the place. I can't read this. Basically, Chase loves Brock Bowers, which, yeah, right now, Brock Bowers is an automatic tight end 3 because he's actually getting targets to the tight end position, which has been, the problem 101 with half these guys that we've been seeing out there. Chris, who is your crush this week?
Well, the problem for Chase to Brock Bowers is like last week when Devontae Adams was out, they just decided not to throw the ball to Brock Bowers either. But my guy that I love this week is Justin Fields. Justin Fields is the guy that I went off of my spiel about earlier on, but a guy who's been playing well. I know he had a turnover last week, but will continue to be the starting quarterback. Had 300 yards passing, 50 yards rushing. For the first time ever in Steeler history that a quarterback has achieved that feat, taking on a decimated Dallas defense that just got lit up by a Daniel Jones. We watched Derrick Henry basically run right through this defense. They have no Micah Parsons. They have no Lawrence. They have no Overstreet. I don't even know. I think maybe Jerry Jones will try to play, or maybe Stephen Jones will try to play linebacker at some point. This Dallas defense is going to be run right through. Justin Fields is a guy trying to keep his position as a starting quarterback for this league. And for that Pittsburgh Steelers offense, Justin Fields, to me, it could be one of the top 3 quarterbacks you want to have in your lineup this week.
Love it. Agree with it. My crush, Dontavian Wicks. Look, he steps in for Christian Watson. Now, Watson may not be going on the IR. So long-term wise, again, we're going to talk about that tomorrow night at 8 o'clock as far as what that may look like. But for the next 2 weeks, I feel like it's safe to say Christian Watson probably not going to play with, even if they want to call it a mild high ankle sprain, however you want to label a high ankle sprain, probably missing at least 2 weeks. And you got to love him this week. So I have him as my wide receiver 11, while ECR's got him at wide receiver 32. That's criminally too low with Jordan Love being back. Wicks comes in last week, was the favorite target of Jordan Love. Even despite the fact that Jaden Reed had a slightly better fantasy day, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 overall for both of those guys. You go up against a Rams team that is giving up the second most in expected points added per pass, the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. We know Wicks takes on the Christian Watson role as far as the end zone targets go, which is pretty much 97.5, whatever % of the team's targets in the end zone. I exaggerate a little bit, of course, but he's getting the majority of them. When he started games, okay, he's had 7 games between last year and this year that he's either started or played the majority of as the starting wide receiver. He's averaging 12.2 half-point PPR points per game. That puts him as a top 20 receiver just off the rip. You add in the Rams matchup here, this is a top 12 receiver this week. And I like him next week, too, actually against Arizona. But my crush for this week, Dontavian Wicks. Before we wrap up the show, we do have one last question here. Antonio, would you do Allen, Waddle, and Chubb for Richardson and Nico Collins? Chris and Adam, help me out with this one.
Allen, Waddle, and Chubb for Richardson and Nico. Are you playing in a 3-receiver league or a 2-receiver league? Because that would make a big difference to me. If you're only playing a 2-receiver league, I would pull that deal because I think Nico Collins is the best player in the whole list of people you're talking about.
Yeah, 100%. I'm assuming he's giving up Allen, Waddle, Chubb, Richardson, and Nico Collins. I'm assuming that's Josh Allen. Right?
Okay. So I thought I was Keenan Allen, so there you're good. Good point.
I'm assuming it's Josh Allen.
If that's Josh Allen,
then no.
Yeah, no. No.
If it's Keenan Allen, I'm absolutely doing it.
Yeah.
Adam, if it's Josh Allen, would you do it?
It depends on if I have a pivot from Richardson available. Like if you're in a league that somehow, I mean, look, there's work leagues out there where Baker's still on waivers. Like that's the reality of fantasy football.
And Gino, people hate him.
And if I'm in one of those, then I do consider it because I think the biggest jump from over replacement is going to be Nico Collins rather than the quarterback. Now, if waivers are scarce at quarterback, you're in a more competitive league, I'm not pulling that deal.
Yeah, I tend to agree. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for today's show. I hope you all enjoyed it. It was happy times to be back, guys. Happy to be off the IR and talking fantasy football with you all. Guess what? We'll be back next week, same time, 9:30 here on our YouTube channel at the Fantasy Football Advice Network. Make sure you tune in then, engage with us live, and we will be live on Facebook and on the FF Advice Network on Twitter tomorrow. We will not be live on YouTube. We'll be coming out with the video for that on Friday. We'll release it then, but make sure you check us out. Always Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app. We're available to you wherever you listen to podcasts.